Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher, Sian Wickersham and Tom Breeze. October Half-Term Special 2025.
Hello, you've made it. It's autumn half term. We are still Tom and Emma. We've still got a podcast. It's still going. This is Emma and Tom Talk Teaching. I feel a little bit barking mad, I think, because we are in fact recording this in July.
Yes, we've done this before, haven't we? It never ends well.
Yeah, we're trying to get ahead of ourselves. So for those of you who've made it to autumn half term, well done. We know that first half term can be a bit of a killer after a nice long summer break. We have our usual offering. However, we have slightly unusual setting and we have someone with us. So I should probably give you a little bit of context. For those of you who didn't hear our summer bonus episode, I have got a few big things going on this year that are sort of pulling my time away from the podcast. So we had to pull in some help. And we turned to somebody who I'm going to refer to as another friend, Tom, of the podcast.
Absolutely.
We had a little discussion about maybe enemies of the podcast the other day.
Who's an
I'm
enemy
not
of the
sure who
podcast?
they are.
Yes.
Maybe they'll get named and shamed one day. But Sian Wickersham is with us, and she's going to be with us for quite a few episodes this year as an honorary podcast broadcaster with us.
Stunt double.
A stunt double. I like
that.
it.
Let's go with stunt double. I like that one. So I am officially Emma's stunt double for a few episodes this academic year.
I'm just trying to think of what sort of interesting stunts a podcaster would have to do, like some kind of mental acrobatics that we have to do at weird moments when we're recording. Thankfully, we're not recording live, but we're really pleased to have you, Sian. How are you doing?
Thank you. Yeah, really good. Thank you. I am enjoying the fact that it's October half term. We've made it through that autumn term, and also secretly enjoying the fact that it's actually the start of the summer holidays.
Yeah, it's all going to be a bit strange. Tom's still here.
Yes, I'm still here, helping to soft launch your stunt double.
Yeah, and we're sort of soft launching Sian into a light episode. So for those of you familiar with our light episodes, we have each brought, and actually it means we've had less homework to do, Tom, which has been quite nice. We've each got two offerings. Some education adjacent, some full fat education, some completely light and not connected to education.
And importantly, completely unknown to one another.
Completely unknown to one
honestly don't tell each other.
This freaked me out a little bit. I sort of thought there must be, when I was listening to these episodes in the past, I thought surely they coordinate a little bit.
No.
So it could be that I've brought something that's exactly the same as something that Emma and Tom have brought.
Never happened yet.
Well, I've never been on yet, so...
It's the first time for maybe that's your first stunt double task is to come up with something light just off the cuff if you've doubled up. I'm sure it's not going to happen though. So I think I'm starting, aren't I?
Wow.
Okay, so I'll start with something education focused. Tom and I do a session about AI with our student teachers at the end of the academic year. So they're sort of looking back, thinking about different ways that they perhaps have used AI as teachers, how their pupils are using AI. We're working with secondary student teachers, and it often sparks a lot of really interesting debate, discussion, and from that we come out with a load of sort of guiding rules of thumb or principles that they might apply when they're thinking about using AI in their classrooms. And it's a session that seems to go down quite well. And when I was sort of doing a bit of a wash and a brush up of that session and preparing for it, I came across an article, an opinion piece by Stephen Bush from the Financial Times that was published on the 2nd of June of 2025, entitled, "There are some things in teaching that AI won't change. Knowledge-rich curriculums will still be crucial in a world shaped by the technology." And he goes on to say, "The development of artificial intelligence is one of the biggest changes in how we live and work since at least the invention of the internet. It will change how we all go about our days. It will change and is already changing how we are governed. As a result, there are calls in almost every wealthy country to teach how to use AI in schools or to put AI on the curriculum, or else to rework teaching and assessment so as to reflect just how much of what we ask school children to do can already be done by AI. In any given week, I receive at least one email a day from one campaign group to another calling for exactly this. The debate is about a new technology, but it is part of a venerable argument in education policy about the extent to which school curriculums should be skills-based or knowledge-rich. I'm just going to pause there and just get a temperature check.
You pressed the nuclear button there.
Exactly. And this is a big debate that rages in Wales in particular, isn't it?
5 minutes into the podcast and you've said skills-based versus knowledge-rich.
No.
Into the shelters.
Boom. Okay. Should schools be equipping children with the skills they will need in the future, or giving them a broad foundation of knowledge? One reason why knowledge-rich curriculums have outperformed skills-based programs is that we are terrible at predicting the future. How could it be otherwise? Someone starting compulsory education in Ohio in 1977 couldn't possibly have been expected to know that by the time they left school, their state would have experienced significant deindustrialization, the Cold War would have ended, and personal computers would have started to become affordable for much of Middle America. What skills will today's children need in the world of AI? History teaches us that those we once thought would ensure a reliable income forever are no guarantee of any such thing. Coders, who relatively recently were considered to be the inheritors of the earth, now face an uncertain job market and may never go back to the same position and security they enjoyed, say, 5 years ago. In some ways, the distinction between skills and knowledge is a false binary. As Daisy Christodoulou, another big name we've come across on this podcast, another temperature check, everyone okay?
Yeah.
Director of Education at No More Marking, puts it, it is like asking what the right balance is between ingredients and cake. No More Marking, which uses AI and other tools to reduce the amount of teacher time, the most expensive and also most valuable resource in schools, I'm glad he made that point, spent on marking, is itself a good illustration of difference. Automating marking and other administrative tasks frees teachers up, but to take advantage of the extra time available, they need the knowledge base to understand what they're doing. And I think that's something that comes out with the student teachers that we work with. One of the conclusions that they draw is that, yeah, it's fine, you can use it, but you have to know and understand the thing that you're using it to do. Otherwise, you're not going to necessarily be able to use it to the best. You're not going to spot any mistakes, etc. But I digress. Going back to the article, many of my friends who work in skilled trades make the bulk of their income in repair work, but their training didn't begin with a leaky tap or faulty wiring. It began with acquiring a layer of fundamental knowledge. That's the other reason why knowledge-rich curriculums are better than skills-heavy ones. It is knowledge that allows you to deploy and use your skills. The same is true of AI. Part of deploying this technology effectively in a range of fields is having the necessary knowledge base to understand how to use it and to make judgments about whether it has given you the right or appropriate answer. As AI becomes more advanced, my suspicion is that our own knowledge will matter more and more, as we will need to be able to justify and explain why we have picked a particular option and why AI has reached its decisions. That isn't to say that AI shouldn't change what is on our curriculums. The curriculum in England is an example of the right approach here, in that it aims to give students the ability to understand the fundamentals of how coding and computers work. While knowing how to code may not be a useful skill in the workplace of the future, understanding how code works and how it is that computers know things is going to be vital. We will be navigating a world where being able to understand why AI behaves as it does will almost certainly be crucial in assessing everything from how we are governed to whether we're receiving adequate service. A curriculum that equips children to use AI and to live and work in a world shaped by it will still be one that imparts knowledge about the technology and about computers more generally, rather than honing particular skills. We won't be equipping the next generation to get the most out of the new thinking machines if we aren't teaching them how to think for themselves first.
Ooh, there were a couple of things in there, weren't they?
Yeah.
You could definitely see his viewpoint coming through, couldn't you?
For sure. He sits on a particular side of the debate, doesn't he?
Yeah, I was interested in the claim that knowledge-based curriculums have outperformed skills. But what does outperformed mean? Is that in terms of sales? Is it in terms of results?
Outcomes.
Yeah.
Are we measuring? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
What are we measuring?
But then he goes on later to say that they're better.
Yeah.
So maybe he means that he thinks they're better.
I was-
And that's his kind of
It is an
metric.
opinion piece, so I
Yeah.
suppose you
Oh,
know
yeah.
he's gonna put it out and let it all hang out. I
Yeah.
suppose.
Do you know who he is? Who's written this?
Oh gosh, now
Sorry.
you're testing me. So this is Stephen Bush from the Financial Times. I don't know anything about his
No, I don't
background,
know
but
him.
I can look that up for you, or I can ask AI.
Yeah, I was sort of interested that, you think about curriculum for Wales, which I know there's an ongoing debate as to whether curriculum for Wales downgraded knowledge or not, and I know the people behind it would vehemently deny that, but I think it's probably fair to say that there is a perception out there in the world that when it was sort of framed by Donaldson back in 2015, his argument was basically, specific content is, you can't do it now because everything's moving so fast. And the argument being put in that opinion piece is everything's moving so fast, and so actually we need a knowledge-rich curriculum. It's funny that kind of people who could be seen as being on both sides of the debate have co-opted the same argument for
Yes.
their approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, I found that interesting too. And the point about coding, it hadn't quite occurred to me that they are now sort of redundant, I suppose. And the other thing that struck me about it was the consequences for subject specialists in, I don't even know whether they call it IT in schools nowadays. I know we do on our programmes, but how fast moving that curriculum would need to be, and to what extent teachers out there are thinking, okay, how do we equip young people?
I feel like it's always been like that though. Like I definitely remember being sat in IT in high school and being sort of told how to use certain bits of technology, and I thought, you know what, there's a new version of this, and the teacher wouldn't have known that. Like, yes, stuff's moving, but hasn't it always been doing that?
I suppose so, but then I suppose, like, when do you come back? Because he's sort of making a point that there is some fundamental knowledge that we need to know about, but then if these new technologies are always evolving, even then it's sort of, how do you know what you need to know, and where does that end?
Yeah, it's always been the case that the kids are seen to be better at the tech than the teachers. And so we
Yeah.
always have to have a discussion about this here
Yeah.
when I'm teaching on the digital competence program, that yes, they can press the buttons faster. Yes, they know more apps than we do or whatever, but there's something else that they can't do, which we can, which is that sort of critical thinking and discrimination. I think this point about coding is interesting though, because of course this argument is being made that code is going to get generated by AI and people are just going to be sort of quality checking it. I mean, there's so many stories out there in the IT press about stuff going horribly wrong in, like, banking systems and stuff like that, because code from the 70s, has been sitting in computers, that people have long since either retired or died, and then something goes a bit wrong and nobody can quite find it. Well, what are we going to do when no human ever wrote the code in the first place and we don't know why the code ended up why it was, and it's buried somewhere in a system, and then 30 years later something goes wrong with it? That could end quite badly.
Yeah, and that's where I get on board with his argument that, we've got to sort of teach them to understand what it's doing and how it's doing it, and to think for themselves. And so we had a team meeting about this just recently, didn't we, where we thought, this is huge, but at the bottom line of it all is that we need to teach teachers to be sort of critical in their thinking around it, use of it, being sort of skeptical of it, really. But I suppose this does bring another thing to the party, which is knowing what it's doing. I remember one of those early sessions, one of your students, Tom, brought to the table, and this is before we'd interviewed Mark Lester. If those of you heard, we've got an episode in an earlier season with Mark Lester, our former librarian, about AI and the environmental impact. And this is something a student teacher had brought, and everybody sort of looked aghast and thought, okay, I hadn't really thought about that, and the sort of ethics of, where is it drawing its information from? So all of that is really important for them to know.
Yeah, I think the copyright stuff is really interesting too, along with the kind of creativity side.
Yes.
Like, actually, who does it belong to? And I think that once you've put something into AI, it's in there then. Like, it belongs to, it's part of the terms and conditions, it belongs to whichever AI you're using. And so in terms of your kind of product that you're creating and things like your unique ideas as well, do we actually want to be putting them in ourselves, but also do we want the children in the classrooms to feel like anything they create is just open for everyone? Maybe we do, maybe we don't. And then that, along with the environmental impact, is just huge. It's the equivalent of, Mark Lester says, doesn't he, pouring a bottle of water. Every time you put something in, it's like you've bought a plastic bottle of water and you've poured it away.
Yeah. And they're talking today, you know, here we are in July, they're talking about needing more data centres.
Yeah.
You know, it's growing, it's not going away. So yeah, we could go to town on this, but we don't tend to go too deep on light episodes. I'm going to hand swiftly over to Tom.
Fair enough. Yes, you've pinched my little niche of AI is going to be the end of us all. So I normally bring that to it. No,
I've got an
fine.
AI thing as well. Have you got
Have
another
you?
one? Yeah.
No, I have no AI
Okay.
at all.
Well, maybe we'll have a little
today.
break and then we'll come to my AI.
Yes. Yeah, I've got 2 items for my 2 that are both connected, and they are me trying to make sense of some of the personal qualities that teachers need, perhaps some of the underrated personal qualities that teachers need, or perhaps the ones that we have a bit of an ambivalent relationship with, and to try and make sense of those by going to other fields of endeavour and trying to make sense of them. And the first one that I'm bringing today, which I had a really big think about a little while ago, was this idea of pursuing perfection. Perfectionism gets a bit of a bad reputation, I think, doesn't it? And certainly we often have to kind of peel certain student teachers off the ceiling because they have quite perfectionist tendencies. And obviously nothing can, you can never be the perfect teacher. Not every lesson is going to be perfect. Lots of student teachers have just come out of degrees where they stand or fall purely really on their own abilities. It's all under their control, and then suddenly they're in a classroom and they can plan a brilliant lesson. It can all go to hell in a handcart, and it's not their fault, but they just sort of can't cope with it. And so perfectionism gets a bit of a bad reputation. And I was sort of thinking about the fact that, well, there are some of us, quite a lot of us, I suppose, and certainly all 3 of us have trained in various performing arts. I know you're a musician, Sian.
Yes,
musician.
I am. A secret former musician, but can
No,
you ever be a former musician?
Never a former musician. And so probably, I would probably wager that all 3 of us at one point or another have been in one of those very sort of high performance environments where perhaps, the stakes are quite high and everything's quite sort of unforgiving. But that actually kind of secretly, we do sort of think, well, some of that was really formative and really good. And actually some of those experiences were great. And then I sort of got thinking about, well, how do we find that balance between perfection, not sort of lowering our standards, going for the really high standards, but it not kind of going into something really, really unhealthy. And I ended up in a bit of a rabbit hole looking at people from the world of food, from the world of chefs and restaurants and things like
my
that.
language now.
So the first, I've got a couple of things to bring just to get us thinking really about how we can make this balance work. And the first one that I've got is I'm going to have to go and dig my laptop out from under a pile of wires down on the floor by my feet, is a clip. So you're going to have to stick your headphones on from, I suppose, a fairly famous chef who's fairly famous for his perfectionism, and that's Gordon Ramsay. And he talks in this clip about his formative years working in a very small, very cramped gastropub kitchen with Marco Pierre White, who is a bit of a crazy bloke by all accounts. I've read accounts of him, and he is a pretty wild bloke. And so the first thing I thought we'd have a listen to is a quick clip of Gordon Ramsay talking about the effect that had on him and his standards. So here I go, looking for my clip.
It was one of the most important times of my career, 2.5 years with a powerhouse, phenomenal chef. That was on a mission, man. Oh my God. We had a dogmatic, substandard reputation in this country. Food in the 90s, it just wasn't anywhere near what was going on in France or Spain. And so Marco was on this surge to pioneer a Brit cooking, haute cuisine and fine dining. But it was the energy, I think, that I got excited about. And I could match his energy for the level of attention to detail, fitness, and I learned quickly. And so it was like the perfect apprenticeship, but I learned more than just cooking. He put food on a plate like Picasso. The speed of him and the way his mind worked was just, and then traveling, going from 2 to 3 stars, the most exciting part of a career, because it's the hardest jump in life and it's the most ornate, demanding, difficult, fine light, detail from 2 to 3. Everyone thinks it's a formula. It's nothing to do with a formula. It's that level of perfection. And so watching him and being by his side, I had to practice. And even silly things like expensive sea bass. I used to buy mackerel on my day off and fillet the mackerel because it had the same rib cage as a sea bass. So when I got into work on Monday, I could show him, I can fillet this sea bass. I'm not going to waste it. It's a 50, 60 pound fish. I'm going to fillet that, pin bone it, stuff it with a scallop mousse and match your level of perfection. So just little nuances like that built me.
And I think we can all get on board with this idea of being in a sort of high performance environment and really, really pushing yourself. But we can also, from the work that we all do, get on board with the idea that that kind of isn't for everybody, and that pursuit of perfection can be not so good. And obviously there is a whole thing about the professional cooking world being a sort of testosterone fueled nightmare, and Gordon Ramsay is quite well known for embodying that and probably playing up to that to some extent. So I went elsewhere and I had a little read of a famous book about chefs, Kitchen Confidential by Anthony Bourdain, the late Anthony Bourdain. And he again is one of these people who's played up to a testosterone-fueled sort of rock star thing. He writes very vividly about his sort of pirate crew in his kitchen. And I'm sort of thinking, yeah, again, we have a problem here. But then he takes a moment to acknowledge that actually it doesn't have to be like that there is a different way of doing it. So I've got a little extract of that part of his book just to kind of get us thinking in a slightly different way. So he says, in my kitchens, I'm in charge. It's always my ship, and the tenor, tone and hierarchy, even the background music, are largely my doing. A chef who plays old Sex Pistols songs while he breaks down chickens for coq au vin is sending a message to his crew, regardless of his adherence to any Escoffier-era merit system. It's no coincidence all my kitchens over time came to resemble one another and are reminiscent of the kitchens I grew up in. Noisy, debauched and overloaded with faux testosterone. An effective kitchen, but a family affair and a dysfunctional one at that. I coddle my hooligans when I'm not bullying them. I'm visibly charmed by their extracurricular excesses and their antisocial tendencies. My love for chaos, conspiracy and the dark side of human nature colours the behaviour of my charges, most of whom are already living near the fringes of acceptable conduct. Let's take a look at a 3-star chef who runs a very different kind of kitchen than mine, who makes food at a higher level, has had a nearly unblemished track record of working with the best in the business, a guy who's always kept his eye on the ball, which is to say, the food. If I suffer by comparison, so be it. During the middle of the rush on a Friday night with a full dining room, the pace was positively relaxing. More a seriously focused waltz than the kind of hard-checking mosh pit slam dancing I live with. No one was screaming. No one was kicking any oven doors closed, putting any spin on the plates or hurling pots into the sink. No one was cursing or sweating. The stovetops, cutting boards, counter space, cook's whites, even the aprons were spotless at 8:30 on a Friday night. Each sauce and salad, each item was tasted by the person preparing it each and every time. A tiny young woman worked at a corner station, and I made the immediate Neanderthal assumption as I first took in the crew. Work experience. Having a learning experience dishing out veggies. I passed right over her as I swept my eyes down the line looking for the heavy hitters. In time, I began peripherally to become aware of her movements. I looked again, closer this time, and saw she was plating fish, cooking risotto, emulsifying sauces, taking on 3, then 4, then 5 orders at a time, all the while never changing expression or showing any visible signs of frustration or exasperation as I would have under similar circumstances. No worries, just smooth, practiced motions. Moves you see in 20-year veterans. No pot grabbed without a towel. No wasted effort. Every sauce getting a quick taste. Correcting seasonings, coming up on her stuff at the same time as the rest of the order. Generally holding down her end like an ass-kicking, name-taking mercenary of the old school, only cleaner and better. Her station and her uniform were absolutely unmarked by spills, stains, or any of the expected Friday night detritus. Where did she come from? I whispered to the chef. Not amazed that a woman could do the job, but that anyone other than a 35-year-old Ecuadorian mercenary could do it so stone cold. Oh, her, he said casually. Alain Ducasse, mentioning God's name, as breezily as I'd say the Hilton or Hooligans.
Boom.
And I just love the idea that perfectionism or being really good or having the highest standards can take so many different forms, and you've got to find the one that's right for you.
Yes.
Yeah, you've overwhelmed us with the kind of like the flowery language in that last bit there. A couple of thoughts I had. The bit with Gordon Ramsay and the filleting the mackerel, I think that's really interesting, isn't it? Like breaking something down into its kind of component parts and then practicing that element. It's a deliberate practice thing, isn't it? Just to, bring us into education again.
Well done.
Yeah.
And then, this idea of there being very different kitchens, working at that high level, and that you could tell who had trained in which way. They are obsessed chefs, aren't they, with like the state of the bench. Do you ever watch MasterChef or anything like that? They're like, oh, this dish was delicious, but look at their bench. Yeah. And they like take points off. I took a tour of a school once, and I remember the head teacher was showing me around, and we walked into one classroom, and it was a state. It was a real sort of, it wasn't the end of term, papers piled high, rubbish on the floor. It was a real state. And he sort of looked at me and said, you can tell what type of teacher works in here, can't you? Like just by walking in and looking. So, people in education have these views as well, don't they?
Yeah,
but also you get some real high performers who maybe work in that chaotic, what was the phrase? The edge of decency. Their behaviour sits at the edge of
behaviour. Fringes of acceptable behaviour.
We don't have that in teaching, surely.
No. I think the thing that's interesting as well about this is like who sets the tone, who creates the culture, and what does it take to make the sort of culture that, and you're right, there are lots of different ways to be a perfectionist or to be, I don't really like the term perfection because I don't know whether it exists. Maybe it does in some areas. It certainly doesn't in teaching. No. We always make the point to student teachers that there is no perfect lesson and I'm sure that chefs would probably say the same, that like they're never, they're happy with a meal to make it, to a dish to make it to the menu, but they're probably never absolutely hand on heart satisfied that it's perfect.
Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts, aren't there? Like you could probably say, I made a perfect dish, maybe. Like this particular plate is maybe not perfect, but it's as good as I could ever expect it to be. Yeah. But I bet they wouldn't ever say there was a perfect service.
Yeah.
Like a whole sort of like 3-4 hours of restaurant time. Like someone's going to burn their hand. Yeah. Like one plate's going to go out substandard.
But in terms of like being comfortable with perfectionism and how that can happen, I think I love stuff to do with the culinary world because I really like that aspiration, that environment. They're referred to as a brigade as well, the support, but the culture and the difference in culture is what I can't get on board with. You're absolutely right. I mean, Gordon Ramsay, he sounded quite pleasant there. He sounded actually like he wasn't being a caricature of himself. I think that's when I really dislike him, is when he's being this really uber masculine, uber authoritarian, assertive. I just cannot get on board with the man. But I can get on board with, and I know his background. I think he grew up in a pretty tough area of Glasgow. He came from poverty, and he was, he believed in a lot of hard work. I think, I don't know whether he'd say these words, but I think that culinary world saved him and put him on a path to where he is now. But the idea of striving to be better and working, Tom and I talk about this quite a lot, working with someone that is significantly better than you, and that being okay, and that not being some kind of stick to beat yourself with, but actually that you seek out those people, I can get on board with that.
Yeah, I think in terms of that thing about setting the culture as well, I don't know, I've got a hunch that as a leader, it might be harder to recognise and value the person who's quietly and undemonstratively incredibly good, rather than somebody who's very, very good but makes a sort of massive loud song and dance about it. Sort of feel like that's a harder thing to spot and nurture as a leader.
Yeah, when I was a student teacher in my first job, not a student teacher, I was a newly qualified teacher in my first job, I was assigned to a form tutor, and she was very, very quiet. She was a D&T teacher, but she was incredibly good. She knew those kids so well. Her quiet but assertive manner, her high standards, and she was exactly that. She was somebody who was not, she was not vocal in team briefings. You blink and you'd missed her, but when you were in her classroom, the work and the outcomes that she was getting out of those kids was just phenomenal. So yeah, I would agree with that.
There we go. Something to think about as you pursue your high standards.
Fantastic. So I'm going to bring us back to AI. Maybe I should have interrupted, but maybe it was quite nice to have a little break. I was panicking when you did your introduction. I thought it's happened. I thought the same thing, but I haven't. So this is, I'd actually originally brought the abstract of the actual article. But I was chatting to my husband about it last night and saying, oh, I've got this really interesting article to talk about on the podcast. And he said, oh, I've read about that in The Economist. And The Economist have done an article on it on the 16th of July, which has summarised it in a much better way than the abstract manages to, as is often the case with journalism. And it's called Will AI Make You Stupid? That is the title. Creativity and critical thinking might take a hit, but there are ways to soften the blow. As anybody who has ever taken a standardised test will know, racing to answer an expansive essay question in 20 minutes or less takes serious brain power. Having unfettered access to artificial intelligence would certainly lighten the mental load. But as a recent study by researchers at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology suggest, that help may come at a cost. Over the course of a series of essay writing sessions, students working with, as well as without, ChatGPT were hooked up to, long word coming up, electroencephalograms, EEGs, impressed?
Very.
To measure their brain activity as they toiled. Across the board, the AI users exhibited markedly lower neural activity in parts of the brain associated with creative functions and attention. Students who wrote with the chatbot's help also found it much harder to provide an accurate quote from the paper that they had just produced. The findings are part of a growing body of work on the potentially detrimental effects of AI use for creativity and learning. This research points to important questions about whether the impressive short-term gains afforded by generative AI may occur a hidden long-term debt. The MIT study augments the findings of two other high-profile studies on the relationship between AI use and critical thinking. The first, by researchers at Microsoft Research, surveyed 319 knowledge workers who used generative AI at least once a week. The respondents described undertaking more than 900 tasks, from summarising lengthy documents to designing a marketing campaign with the help of AI. According to participant self-assessments, only 555 of these tasks required critical thinking, such as having to review an AI output closely before passing it to a client, or revising a prompt after the AI generated an inadequate result on the first go. The rest of the tasks were deemed essentially mindless. Overall, a majority of workers reported needing either less or much less cognitive effort to complete tasks with generative AI tools such as ChatGPT, Google Gemini, or Microsoft's own Copilot AI assistant, compared to doing those tasks without AI. It goes on to talk about another study then, but I'm going to move on to a next paragraph. Whether AI will leave people's brains flabby and weak in the long term remains an open question. Researchers have stressed that further work is needed to establish a definitive causal link between elevated AI use and weakened brains. There are kind of limitations to both of these different studies, and some of them have got really small sample sizes. So the recent MIT one is only 54 participants. Moreover, generative AI tools explicitly seek to lighten people's mental loads as many other technologies do. As long ago as the 5th century BC, Socrates was quoted as grumbling that writing is not a potion for remembering, but for reminding. Calculators spare cashiers from computing a bill. Navigation apps remove the need for map reading. And yet few would argue that people are less capable as a result. There is little evidence to suggest that allowing machines to do users' mental bidding alters the brain's inherent capacity for thinking, says Evan Risco, a professor of psychology at the University of Waterloo. And a colleague, Sam Gilbert, coined the term cognitive offloading to describe how people shrug off difficult or tedious mental tasks to external aids. The worry is that, as Dr. Risco puts it, generative AI allows one to offload a much more complex set of processes. Offloading some mental arithmetic, which has only a narrow set of applications, is not the same as offloading a thought process like writing or problem solving. And once the brain has developed a taste for offloading, it can be a hard habit to kick. There we go. So there's more in there. But I think it's really interesting because it gets me thinking about the point that you're making about how we're teaching children to use AI. But essentially what the study finds is that the people who used AI did less thinking than the ones who didn't, and as a result did a slightly worse job at, albeit a very narrow set of tasks.
Yeah.
And I was discussing this with some teacher friends a couple of weeks ago when it first came out, and we were discussing lesson planning.
Right.
This idea that the student teachers can use AI to write lessons. And in some ways we think, great, right? Like this is going to really help them in terms of workload. But my concern, and I feel like this kind of backs that up, is that lesson planning is a skill, right?
Yeah.
That we kind of learn and develop over time. And if we're outsourcing it to AI, we're not developing that skill. And so when that thing goes wrong in the moment, are we going to have the skill to be able to adapt? And I feel like that kind of applies with lots of different areas.
Yeah. It's got me thinking about learning. That's what it comes back to, is a big part of learning is thinking.
Yeah.
And if you're offloading the thinking, then you're not necessarily going to learn from. And your lesson planning one was a perfect analogy. It also got me thinking as you were reading, I think it's because we've had an item about food beforehand, about ultra-processed food and anything that kind of shortcuts something that almost like our brains, our physiology is sort of designed to do, like fibre, for example. You know, when we're not having real food, we have all kinds of digestive problems, and we're seeing this kind of in the research into ultra-processed foods. All of the consequences that are happening to us physiologically because we've just short-circuited something through our own sort of, you know, desire to advance and to be better and to progress. We've lost something fundamental about ourselves as humans along the way. And in this instance, it's thought, it's thinking, like what makes us human? Like if we don't think, if we don't need to think, then who are we? What are we?
I think the lesson planning point is a good one because like, we bang on about this, don't we? That for a new teacher, lesson planning is thinking.
Yeah.
And a lesson plan is the representation of your thinking. But to think about AI generating you a lesson plan is to misunderstand the point of planning in the first place, you know, to assume it's sort of to generate a kind of thing to wave around. Although, that being said, if I'm gonna come on the flip side, as I was hearing that, I was sort of mentally placing AI, ChatGPT, all that kind of stuff at the end of a very, very long list of things that have been held up as, you know, they're going to make us all irredeemably stupid, along with, you know, social media, the internet, search engines, TV, all of these things that we're going to mush our brains into mush.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing that I think is interesting, though, as well, if we're talking about thinking, is that only a few participants in the interviews kind of recognised that they had done less thinking. Like most people thought they hadn't done less thinking. And also participants who were in the brain-only group. So they had a group of people
What did they look like? Were they in a jar?
They were in a jar, yeah. They reported higher satisfaction compared to the other groups.
Yeah.
Which, back to the ultra-processed food, right? That's kind of interesting.
See how we said to Sian before we started recording that often when we do these episodes, some kind of link starts to emerge, and this, you know, where do we get our satisfaction from? When you were reading it, it got me thinking about when I was doing my thematic coding for my Ed D. So I took a load of transcripts and I had to read them and reread them and look for codes and themes, etc. And it was really hard. It was really hard and really painstaking and time consuming. I could easily have put those transcripts into AI, and it could have produced, maybe it could have produced what I found, but I know what I would have lost. And it's the understanding of the humans at the heart of, it's really not ethical, I don't think. If I'd have got a machine to do that, when I was, in the room with them, they're people that I know, these are people that took the time to give their views. And I think it's weighing that up, isn't it? And really trying to reflect on what you're losing by making these shortcuts.
I will say, though, that there's something in it being allowed as well, which I feel slightly, because whenever I use AI, I feel a bit like it's kind of a naughty thing to do. I'm taking a shortcut. Yeah. But actually, I'm doing my EdD, and we had a session on like allowed use of AI. And after that session, I felt a bit better about it because I was like, oh, okay, it's not, I'm allowed to do it for like, you know, cleaning up my references and stuff like that.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. And I wonder whether, coming back to your thing at the beginning, this is almost what needs to be discussed, right? It's not that we don't want to use it. Obviously, we want to use it because it's, you know, going to be a big thing that's going to move us forward as a human species. We've gotten deep.
Yeah.
But actually, like, how we use it, like what's the right way to do it, and allowing children space to grapple with these issues is going to be really important for them, because otherwise they could go into it kind of eyes blind to some of these other kind of more knotty issues.
Boom. Gosh, this is getting quite heavy. We need to get somewhere light again, don't we? I'll try and bring us into the light with something that pulls us completely away from technology. I've been listening to a new interview series. I really like unique interview formats. That's why I really like Desert Island Discs. And one that I've been enjoying quite recently is from BBC Sounds, BBC production, called This Natural Life, a new interview series where Martha Carney takes people to a favourite place to explore their passion for nature. And an episode that grabbed me the other day, just as I'd kind of gotten into the car, and she was interviewing Sir Anthony Gormley, who is a famous sculptor. He's known for the Angel of the North, but also a piece called Another Place, which is on Crosby Beach near Liverpool, which is where this episode is set, where he's got 100 cast iron figures that are sort of looking out to sea. So we're going to hear a clip, and it's an interesting question that she asks Anthony Gormley about art, nature and spirituality. We'll have a listen, and then I might ask you guys something off the back of it. Here goes.
You're listening to This Natural Life. I'm walking along Crosby Beach with the artist Sir Anthony Gormley. And I was wondering, Anthony, you were describing part of the inspiration for your work as thinking about it as a meditation. And you were raised as a Catholic, you were very interested in Buddhism. Does that affect that idea of spirituality? Does it affect your attitude towards the natural world, do you think?
Yeah, I'm always slightly wary of claiming any spiritual kind of inherent quality in the work.
Well, you did call one Angel of the North.
I did, yeah, I did. I just think that contemplation and the invitation to be still and to, in a way, immerse yourself in being rather than doing is really an important part of being alive. And if we're always trying to achieve things, if we're always goal-driven, if we're always, in a way, ruled by our tools, which is particularly true in a digital age, you know, the offer that art can give, which is, well, here's a place to pause and just, in a way, take a bit of time out of trying to achieve anything and just recognize what a miracle it is, this world that we share.
And do you have a favourite place where you like to go to be still, to contemplate?
Well, I guess for me it has to be the sea. So now it's bits of the North Norfolk coast. I just love just being there by the sea and listening to the seabirds and sort of letting all of the city things fall away.
So there you have it, Sir Anthony Gormley. I really like his sentiments about being still and not being ruled by our tools, and that art being a sort of outlet for that. But the question I wanted to ask you both is, do you have a favourite place where you like to go to be still, to contemplate? What does it for you? Is that a thing for you?
It's quite a hard question. So for listeners, I've got a 5-year-old and a 1-year-old. So being still and contemplating isn't something that I have an awful lot of time for in sort of personal life. But I did take a day off by myself maybe, was it last summer or might have been the summer before? And I sort of thought, what on earth am I going to do with this whole day off by myself? And the place that called to me was the coast. So to be repetitive. So what I did is I drove down to Rest Bay near Porthcawl, but not the Porthcawl beach, the one slightly further on. And I got myself a loaded chips with all sorts of delicious things. Because I think food, food, contemplation, reflection goes together. And I just sat on the coast and just looked at the view and avoided all small children. Just had a moment to myself. And I sat there for about an hour, hour and a half, and then I read a bit of book. Then, on the way back, I went to Macarthur Glen and did some shopping, which again, slightly meditative too, that kind of walking around somewhere. It's not exactly nature, is it? But just being able to potter and kind of switch off a little bit. So yeah, the coast for me as well. I've been sent a Guardian article this week, which has come out, about model trains being a form of meditation. Now, this isn't relevant to me because I am not particularly into model trains, but my husband is incredibly into model trains. And I always think that's quite interesting as well, like having like a hobby like that is almost like a childlike hobby a little bit. Sometimes people find that, don't they, as sort of a form of space relaxation, but that's not really a place, is it? Although Heath Model Railway is a place.
I sort of think that with this whole idea of having this sort of quiet, I'm going to do my sort of quiet meditation thing now, there's always a bit of a danger that, it's a bit like when people are working on their doctorates but they won't crack it open unless they've got like 3 whole days to work on it, and then they wonder why they haven't done any work on it. It's a bit the same, I think, with that. If you sort of garland it about with all sorts of special things and have to kind of go to a special place and do it in a special way and all that, you'll never do it. Yeah. So I tend to go the other way, and I tend to think, well, do you know what? I'm just going to have 20 minutes in the garden with a cup of tea, and I'm going to leave my phone in the house or something like that. Yeah. So quite mundane, but then you get to have more of it because you don't do this sort of thing about it having to be sort of special and planned and have all sorts of things attached to it.
Yeah, I would agree with all of those points, and it's personal, isn't it? I think I like the wider point as well that he's making about art. Art is obviously an abstraction of life, and it, for many different artistic forms, it forces the consumer or the person experiencing the art to slow things down and to contemplate. So, when you're in an art gallery, when you're listening to music, it's ephemeral, but it has the power to slow down time. Like, drama is a really good example of that. You can compress time. You can look at a moment in depth and detail. And I quite like that contemplatory offer that art makes to people, and that nature does. Maybe that's something that they've got in common. So yeah, I just thought it was a nice little pause for thought.
I tell you what does. I'm just going to go on one now. I tell you what I do worry about sometimes with some of this stuff is that sometimes this stuff about getting away from your notifications or your emails or going off and having retreats and all that sort of stuff, it feels more and more like that's almost become the sort of haves versus the have-nots divide. Because who are the people who can't afford to get away from being ruled by a sort of algorithm and an app? It's the Deliveroo people and the Uber people and the Amazon workers and all of that kind of thing. And then, the whole idea of sort of digital detoxes and all that sort of thing suddenly feels like it's become quite a thing of privilege, doesn't it? It's kind of going back to the AI point, I suppose, isn't it? The people who get ruled by AI first are those with the least, I suspect.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. But then I think about what you just said about sitting in your garden and some of this stuff being, it doesn't have to be the Instagrammer version of contemplation and being in nature, because we get a lot of that, don't you, online, that, this is the way to...
Yeah, the National Trust is an interesting example of that, right? Because to be able to sit in your garden, you have to have a garden.
You do. Yeah.
And then originally National Trust was set up in London for those who don't have gardens to be able to access. And now it's vastly expensive, really. Like, they do incredible work. I'm not, let's not get cancelled for the National Trust
for the
bashing.
vegan scones.
I'm not bashing the National Trust, but in terms of, for those who are living in flats and things, like green spaces are so important, aren't they?
Yeah, and actually, I'm even thinking about myself now. If I say I'll go and sit in the garden and leave my phone in the house, I can afford to leave my phone in the house because I won't
not about
lose
to
work.
miss a shift.
Yeah. Interesting. I don't know. A little bit of grit in the oyster for you there.
No, I like it. I like it. This is what you bring, Tom, and I'm here for it. We're all here for it.
I live on the fringes of social acceptability.
You badass.
Name-taking.
Come on then,
Ecuadorian
badass.
mercenary.
What have you got for us next?
I'm back to personal qualities of teachers, possibly underrated personal qualities of teachers, and I'm back to going somewhere really random to find sort of, I don't know, an angle on it, a way into thinking about it. And this was a very circuitous route by which I got to this one, because at the time that we're recording this, and by the time this comes out, it's going to be nearly a year since Live Aid, isn't it? 40th anniversary of Live Aid. And there's been lots of discussion about that. We could have a whole item about Live Aid, and we weren't not going to have it right now. And that was all kicked off, of course, by one of the most famous pieces of journalism, really, the second half of the 20th century, which was Michael Burke's television report from Coram in Ethiopia. Again, we could probably have a whole item on that. If you haven't seen that TV report, go and see it. It's absolutely amazing. But we're not even going to talk about that. We're going to talk about a really random thing that came out of that, which is that Michael Burke, who now I think is probably mainly known for having been on I'm a Celebrity and having some quite salty views, some of which come across as quite misogynist, I think, to some people, don't they? But back in the day was a famous journalist and became a household name off the back of that famous report. And as a result, was being asked to front a new live program on the BBC. So we're going for live broadcasting as our sort of random route into a personal qualities of teacher thing. He was asked to front a new lunchtime news program, and this, of course, was the 1980s. And a lunchtime news program was in many ways a terrible idea in the 1980s. And the reason it was a terrible idea, of course, was that there wasn't 24-hour news. And there wasn't the technology to get news around the place. And so actually, if you were going to start a live news programme at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you were setting yourself up for a complete nightmare, because America had not woken up yet. So there was no news from America. The Far East had its day, but there wasn't very much that a daytime audience was going to want to know about. And it was very hard to get the news from there. Very little news had happened in the UK. And if it had, it was almost impossible to get a story together by 1 o'clock. So he writes actually very entertainingly in his book about his career about what a total nightmare it was every single day when he used to sit there at 1 o'clock and absolutely nothing was ready. And some of the stuff still survives from that time if you dig around on YouTube. And this is a good way into the teacher's personal quality of staying completely calm in the face of complete and total chaos, which I think is an underrated quality, which we'll probably discuss. So what you're about to hear is apparently not a very unusual day in this wonderful new career opportunity that he was given off the back of his TV journalism fame, which is that with 15 seconds to go before the programme starts, there's absolutely nothing ready from the running order. As the opening music plays, it becomes clear that nothing's going to be ready. As he starts reading the headlines, it becomes clear that actually a lot of the rest of the programme isn't ready either. And as he starts reading the introduction to the first report, they're all shouting at him that it's not ready. At which point they suddenly realise they have got somebody sitting in a studio somewhere else, a politician, and maybe he'd like to interview him instead. And I think one of my favourite moments is when it cuts. You can hear him in the background as this chaos is going on. And then that cuts away and you hear that all the time the daytime TV audience, which was probably well into the millions, I would have thought, in the 1980s, are completely unaware that anything of the sort is happening.
There is nothing to go on air with apart from the opening titles.
15 seconds.
Sorry, I can't advise you any further. There is nothing available. Let me know, grab a VT the moment anything
10,
comes in.
9, 8, 7, 6,
Run titles.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. On air.
On air. Good luck to everyone. We need it today.
29 seconds on titles.
Anything, TX? Anything? Right, we have nothing, Michael, I'm afraid. Right, a vehicle ready if it isn't there. Get a vehicle into TX as soon as possible. I'll let you know if you have to go onto that first. And mix.
8, 7,
Right. Zoom 5, animate charisma.
3,
Stand by for my first cue
1, 0.
and cue.
Good afternoon. The Cabinet
I shouldn't have mixed it in yet.
tried to very talk of divisions over the economy and foreign policy.
Run both animate
6,
and zoom it out. What have you
Rubella.
got? We've got rubella. They don't have it. What do you have? Animate. They only have ambulances.
Have
And
they got
Spain.
rubella? The stage is set for a
No, we do not have
They
this
have it.
story, Mike. What have you got? Do you want to go to the interview right away? You can go to the interview first if you like. Yeah. Can we go to John Biffin? John Biffin interview after this intro.
Street dismissed the controversies as silly games created by the media. Well, joining me now from Westminster is the former Leader of the House and Chief Secretary to the Treasury, John Biffin.
How's your blood pressure?
He's a swan, isn't he?
Yes. Who's ever taught a lesson like that?
Oh my goodness. It's the constant shouting at him as well. And he's just there, good afternoon, in very, received pronunciation. And you just wouldn't know what was going on.
And apparently it was every day.
Oh my gosh. It's a bit like when you get some sort of animal or bug in the classroom. And in your head you're going, oh no, and you're hoping first of all that none of the children know. This might be a primary specific thing. Does this happen in secondary schools?
I had a bottom set year 9 after lunch one day. I think they were year 9, may have been year 8, who found a wasp's nest at lunchtime. And because they were perhaps, this may be controversial, not the highest ability pupils in the school, they decided the thing to do with this wasp's nest was to poke it.
Of course, logical.
And they arrived in my lesson not in the best state, and then a wasp flew into my classroom.
And Eston are there as well in this scenario. They're watching. They're sat in the corner. They're watching. Possibly you've got an important visitor. Maybe the education secretary's in too.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden a badger's walked in.
Yeah.
Along with the wasp that's
Never
flying
had a
around.
badger.
I used to work in inner city London, and it wouldn't be in the classroom, but we would get foxes and badgers all the time in the playground. And again, there'd be parents there. I'd be with year 1, and I'd be like, oh yes, okay, we're just going to go and stand over here, children, thinking to myself, do foxes have rabies? If they bite me, am I going to get really ill?
Yeah.
But yeah, you're often you need to perceive, you need to put out there this kind of calm sense, don't you, as the teacher? But often all of these different things are happening. And often as well, I felt like they were sort of like, yeah, we've got nothing. Sorry, mate. Off you go.
You're on your own with 4 million people.
That kind of thing rings true as well.
Yeah.
Oh, by the way, it's really important that we do this today. It's 5 minutes until your lesson starts, and also you're having a parent meeting. Okay, I guess I'm doing that, am I? That sort of as a teacher, you're there, you're on show, and you're doing it, regardless of the chaos that's happening around you.
Yeah, I totally agree. So the producer's voice, the control room, they are all the teacher's brain, aren't they? They're all the teacher's head.
I mean, it's often, people always talk, don't they, about the fact that the pupils need to feel safe. They need to feel secure, that, you're going to get far more out of them if they feel secure in your classroom. And it's often kind of then expressed in terms of very consistent behaviour management strategies, or as a sort of justification for having a very, very strict behaviour policy. But actually, this is what I mean by the underrated. I think the underrated bit is just, if it all visibly goes to hell in your classroom, you don't then just sort of let it all hang out in front of the kids.
Put your head on the desk and cry.
Yeah. All viable options. I see it really acutely when I go out to co-observe with a mentor in school, who I can tell I'm another piece to the puzzle, and I can see, and I don't want to be that burden on them, but I can see that they're sort of trying to keep talking to me, and they're getting, stuff coming up on class charts, ping, this person's going to be taken out, how's the student teacher going to respond to this? I'm going to need to, and I can see it, I can see and feel that, that pressure that's going on in their head. And I suppose it's something that we try to encourage our student teachers to understand, tap into, know is a thing at the beginning, that you are doing some mental acrobatics, all the while trying to present a calm and collected demeanour. We talk about the novice versus the professional, the learner versus the professional. That's a hard
Yeah, it's really hard. And there is an element that it does just come with time.
Yeah.
Like I always tell the student teachers that my first sort of half term of teaching, every day, twice a day, I would forget to do the register. Like every single day. And a lovely lady from the office would come, knock on the door, give me a knowing look, and I go, oh, the register. And then after that first kind of 6 weeks or so, 8 weeks, October half term, sorry. After that first 8 weeks, I could remember to do it then, because it's that kind of, it's a little bit cognitive load, isn't it? It's a little bit what you're thinking about. I was so focused on the kind of management of the classroom that I would forget to do these basic things. But after a while, certain things get internalised. But then when you're a new teacher, there's obviously, you have to think about everything, because everything is new to you.
I think the thing I learned from being a musician and performing is that actually, if you do completely mess up and you just don't show it, at least 50% of the audience won't realise. And I think that realisation that if you just don't let it show, most of the time they're not going to have a clue that it's happened.
Yeah. I remember having a glaring typo once in an observed lesson, like absolute glaring typo on the screen, like in the learning intention, something like that. And I remember afterwards, you're asked to reflect on the lesson, aren't you? And I sort of said, one thing I noticed was I'm really sorry, because typos was a big no-no in the school. They hadn't even noticed. The two observers had not spotted the glaring typo, and I outed myself. I should have just carried on, and no one would have known.
Yeah. So, I mean, we just need to give ourselves a bit of a break.
Yeah. If it's going to go wrong, just ride it. Don't give too much away. Remember, your kids will tell if you're stressed, and if you're not stressed, they probably won't know.
Yeah.
There we go. Underrated personal qualities of teachers.
Very good. Okay, so Sian, we're into the final offering of the episode. What have you got for us?
I've brought a book. Have either of you read this book?
No.
It's like it claims to be, a fantastic book, a New York Times #1 bestseller. And it's a book called How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Switch is the title. And it's by Chip and Dan Heath, who are kind of like management consultant, techie guys. And I have brought this on a bit of a selfish subtext, which is they've got very complicated imagery in here. And it's imagery that I have internalised deeply into my soul. And I would like to be able to talk about it with Emma and Tom. So I've decided I'm just going to read it. So that when I start talking about elephants and riders and paths, you'll know what I'm talking about from now on. So this is why this is a selfish thing here.
Okay.
So let me open up my little extract. Don't worry, it's an extract. I've got some fancy tabs in for the bit that I'm going to read. The conventional wisdom in psychology, in fact, is that the brain has two independent systems at work at all times. First, there's what we call the emotional side. It's the part of you that is instinctive, that feels pain and pleasure. Second, there is the rational side, also known as the reflective or conscious system. It's the part of you that deliberates and analyses and looks into the future. In the past few decades, psychologists have learned a lot about these two systems. But of course, mankind has always been aware of the tension. Plato said that in our heads we have a rational charioteer who has to rein an unruly horse that barely yields to horsewhip and goad combined. Freud wrote about the selfish id and the conscientious superego, and also about the ego which mediates between them. More recently, behavioural economists dubbed the two systems the planner and the doer. But to us, the duo's tension is captured best by an analogy used by the University of Virginia psychologist Jonathan Haidt in his wonderful book, The Happiness Hypothesis. Haidt says that our emotional side is an elephant, and our rational side is its rider. Perched atop the elephant, the rider holds the reins and seems to be the leader. But the rider's control is precarious because the rider is so small relative to the elephant. Any time the 6-ton elephant and the rider disagree about which direction to go, the rider is going to lose. He's completely overmatched. Most of us are too familiar with situations which our elephant overpowers our rider. You've experienced this if you've slept in, overeaten, dialed up your ex at midnight, procrastinated, tried to quit smoking and failed, skipped the gym, gotten angry and said something you regretted, abandoned your Spanish or piano lessons, refused to speak up in a meeting because you were scared, and so on. Good thing no one is keeping score. The weakness of the elephant, our emotional and instinctive side, is clear. It's lazy and skittish, often looking for the quick payoff, ice cream cone, over the long-term payoff, being thin. We can argue about whether that's a long-term payoff or not. When change efforts fail, it's usually the elephant's fault, since the kind of change we typically want involves short-term sacrifices for long-term payoffs. We cut back on expenses today to yield a better balance sheet next year. We avoid ice cream today for a healthier body next year. Changes often fail because the rider simply can't keep the elephant on the road long enough to reach the destination. The elephant's hunger for instant gratification is the opposite of the rider's strength, which is the ability to think long term, to plan, to think beyond the moment, all those things that your pet can't do. But what may surprise you is that the elephant also has enormous strengths that the rider has crippling weaknesses. The elephant isn't always the bad guy. Emotion is the elephant's turf, love and compassion and sympathy and loyalty. That fierce instinct you have to protect your kids against harm, that's the elephant. That spine stiffening you feel when you need to stand up for yourself, that's the elephant. And more important, if you're contemplating a change, the elephant is the one who gets things done. To make progress towards a goal, whether it's noble or crass, requires the energy and drive of the elephant, and this strength is the mirror image of the rider's great weaknesses, spinning his wheels. The rider tends to overanalyze and overthink things. Chances are you know people with rider problems. Your friend who can agonize for 20 minutes about what to eat for dinner. Your colleague who can brainstorm about new ideas for hours but can't ever seem to make a decision. If you want to change things, you've got to appeal to both. The rider provides the planning and direction, and the elephant provides the energy. So if you reach the riders of your team, but not the elephants, team members will have understanding without motivation. If you reach their elephants, but not their riders, they'll have passion without direction. In both cases, the flaws can be paralysing. A reluctant elephant and a wheel-spinning rider can both ensure that nothing changes. But when elephants and riders move together, change can come easily. And there's just a tiny little summary here. So now you've had a glimpse of the basic framework. This is one that can guide you in situations where you need to change behaviour. Direct the rider. What often looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. So provide crystal clear direction. Motivate the elephant. What looks like laziness is often exhaustion. The rider can't get his way by force for very long. So it's critical that you engage people's emotional side. Get their elephants on the path and cooperative. And then 3, shape the path. What looks like a people problem is often a situation problem. We call the situation, including the surrounding environment, the path. When you shape the path, you make the change more likely, no matter what's happening with the rider and the elephant. So we were given this book to read on my MPQ-SL. And I read it. It must have been 10 years ago now. And I remember being like, oh my goodness, like this is really, really interesting. And then every conversation I had with senior leadership in school then after that was all about riders and elephants and paths. But I think it's really interesting, isn't it? In terms of like how to get change to happen. And obviously I can see skeptical looks on faces. There's certain things that are, it's all a bit, this is why I sort of think of it as almost pop culture. It's kind of like you'd buy this in the self-help section of Waterstones, wouldn't you? Yeah. But yeah, there's something in the idea of it's not enough just to give directions. Like you need that kind of buy-in. And then also this point around the path, I think is really interesting. Often when change doesn't happen, it's not because people don't want it to happen. It's because of the situation that they're in.
Leadership is hard, isn't it? I mean, I'm often really quite snarky about education leaders, and that's because I'm in the luxurious position of never having been one. But the longer I sit in education, the more I realise that, first of all, it's really hard. And secondly, I'm still not convinced that educational leaders always have the sort of same support networks around them that leaders in other industries do.
I'm just contemplating myself, but also situations with colleagues, student teachers, and how sometimes one of those two, the elephant or the rider, is in sharper focus than the other, and perhaps knowing whether to indulge the elephant side for that bit of time, because that's where they're at, before you can move them towards the, okay, so how are we gonna how can we bring the rider in here to sort this out? And it's the same as this sort of self-talk that I do to myself around my Ed D. We're gonna have conversations about this in the future, Sian, about how you kind of go, right, okay, the elephant's dominating here. I'm on to a losing battle. I'm not going to get anywhere, or, you know, and I suppose it's easy to think that it's always the elephant that's coming first, that's going to dictate whether this is going to be a good day in the office or a bad day in the office. I don't know, sometimes, and I've actually taken this from Tom, sometimes just doing, like I hit a real blind spot last Friday because I was getting too emotional about the size of the task, and I was thinking, you're just not going to be able to do this. So the elephant was taking over. But then I went, okay, you've written 2,000 words of this. Let's just look at that and let's just tidy that up a little bit. And so just doing the do a little bit made me go, oh, okay, no, this is doable. So I just need to do it in chunks. So it's that balance, isn't it?
I think so. And I love that you're using elephants and riders now. This is why I wanted to read you this, so that when I start talking about elephants and riders, people don't look at me like I'm a crazy person. I think as well, like a level of self-awareness too, like that kind of example there, like knowing why it is that you're not being able to do something can be really helpful, and kind of taking that step back and saying, actually, I'm really not emotionally invested in this task. I'm doing it because I've been told to do it. I need to have a think to myself about why I should be doing this task. And if I think actually I shouldn't, maybe I need to have that conversation with someone. There's some really interesting kind of studies and stuff that they talk about in there. And one of them is they put people in a room, and it's all like, I don't know how it got through ethical approval. It's all kind of like secret studies within studies, you know, America, maybe that's how it got through. No offense to any American listeners. But yeah, one of them is they have a plate of cookies and a plate of radishes, and they tell one group to eat the cookies and one group to eat the radishes. And then after that, they ask them to do a task. And the group that weren't allowed to eat the cookies, so the cookies were there and they had to resist them, have less, the task is an impossible task, I think. The group that ate the radishes spend significantly less time on the impossible task, because they've spent time resisting the cookies. Whereas the group that eat the cookies spend, I think it's like an extra 9 minutes or something on this impossible task. And I think that's quite interesting too, isn't it? If we're asking people to do things that is kind of contrary to their beliefs, like my belief is I should eat cookies instead of radishes, but you know what I mean? Like we're asking them to do stuff that doesn't appeal to their elephant, and therefore their rider can't really necessarily get on board.
Yeah.
Actually, people have less motivation to do those different things.
Yeah, and I think you need to know whether your kryptonite is trying to get stuff out the door too fast or not getting stuff out the door fast enough. And we're all one way or the other inclined. Emma and I've said this a lot on the podcast before, you know, that actually one of the brilliant things about us working together is that one of us will rub the edges off the other in that, because I know I will tend to want to chuck stuff out of the door and have it done, sometimes to my detriment.
There was a light episode actually. You're a procrastinator and I'm a procrastinator.
That was it. Yes, we had another little therapy session then, didn't we?
We did.
Yeah. See, I worry now because I think I'm in the Tom camp. So what is going to happen, you know, while I'm your stunt double? Yeah. Things are just going to be terrible.
The episodes are going to be
absolutely
awful.
Diabolical.
Very short.
Yeah. No preparation. We're just going to turn up and absolutely wing it.
Get it out the door.
Yeah, it's fine. Let's just do it. Let's just press record.
You've got shorter episodes to look forward to, listeners. Maybe that's a good thing. Brilliant. Okay. Well, we've done it again. It's been all the better, actually, having you with us, Sian.
Oh, thanks, guys.
We've had a real variety, but again, flukily, and hopefully this has put your mind at rest, Sian. Flukily, we've got a nice sort of through line, lots of connections between our short offerings. We hope that has given you sort of a pause for thought and contemplation and things to think about, or just something to entertain yourself during half term whilst you're doing other things. We will be back with you with another episode in 2 weeks' time. Thanks for listening.
You've been listening to Emma and Tom Talk Teaching, a podcast about all things education, presented by Emma O'Dooher, Sian Wickersham and Tom Breeze. We hope you enjoyed our slightly left field offerings this time around, and normal service will be resumed in a fortnight. Podcast artwork is by Beth Blandford and the music is by Cameron Stewart. We're on various social media at Talk Teaching Pod if you want to come and say hello. We'll be back in a fortnight with something else interesting. Until then, take care and enjoy teaching.